edition of Waiting for Next Year's CavsCast. We're part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. This is your host, Seth, and joining me again tonight, you can read his work on Write Down Euclid, listen to him daily at Locked On Cavs, follow him on Twitter at amnotevan. Evan Dammarell is joining us again. Evan, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. We were talking briefly before this, and I know you were writing late last night, a little sleepy, so we're going to keep it nice and tight tonight, right?
I mean, I'm happy to talk Cavs with you whenever you want to, man. It's just last night's game. It was cool. I was talking about it on Locked On Cavs quite a bit. Like, it was cool to be in that environment, in the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, just setting, just listening to like that playoff caliber atmosphere. You could feel the roof really come off the place at times, just when Donovan Mitchell making some buckets and just playing his butt off towards the end of the game. But yeah, I'm excited. And me staying up late writing was my own fault because I kept putting off this story for such a long time. And I'm like, you know what? I promised Thursday, and I have to sit down and do some actual number crunching and research, and that was the bulk of it. And then thankfully, Jared Allen and then the seldom spoken Evan Mobley gave me enough quotes to work with that I could make it work.
I love it. We're truly getting May basketball in November right now. It's almost, I feel almost like guilty in a way because we've seen two of the best games of the entire NBA season just in the past couple of days. So it's been an absolute treat. And since the last time Evan and I got to talk to folks that are listening, the Cavaliers have gone 3-0. They've moved to 6-1 on the season. They're in second place behind only the undefeated Milwaukee Bucks. They are third in net rating. We're not going to go into detail for each game, but obviously they're 2-0 against Boston over the past roughly week or so. They won a great game over the Knicks in which they had a avalanche in the fourth quarter where they kind of played like crap, Evan, I think, for chunks of that Knicks game. But that fourth quarter, I think they outscored the Knicks 37-15. Just, any takeaways from we'll keep the Boston game fresh for a moment. We can talk about that in a second. Any takeaways from the initial Boston and or Knicks game?
The Knicks game, especially the fact that the Cavs took 53 pointers still boggles the mind quite a little bit. It was fun to see it happen. I think more than anything, if you just want to look at both games as just a single package, the Cavs won in two very different ways at the end of the day. Like against New York, like I mentioned, they took a lot of 3-pointers and they made the majority of them. They played to how New York was defending them, which was packing the paint, kind of daring Cleveland to outshoot them, and Cleveland gladly accepted the challenge there. And then when it comes to Boston, at least, we can talk about it more, but it was more so a little bit less 3-point shooting. It was more so just kind of grinding it out at times, then finding rare opportunities to get easy looks inside the basket. They, I believe, outscored Boston 52-40 something in the paint on Wednesday night. So like it was a really fun game and just stylistically two very different tones for the Cavs. And I think them being so multifaceted in the ways and how they can win games is very encouraging this early into the season to say like, okay, this Cavs team is a little more adaptive and reactive to how teams are playing them. And it kind of makes them a little bit more unpredictable when they kind of start figuring out like what their true strengths are, probably about mid-season.
Mm-hmm. That Knicks game, I mean, you got contributions all over the bench. Kevin Love, Dean Wade. I mean, these guys that you maybe didn't anticipate early on are having taken a lot of shots, playing huge in certain games without Darius Garland. And then exactly to your point, last night's game in which the Cavs won 114-113, their bench really did nothing. The Boston Celtics hit 26 of 27 free throws. There was a lot of stuff going against Cleveland last night, and for them to just figure out a way to get it done, whether it was Donovan Mitchell making tough shots or obviously Darius Garland just having an absolute hell of a game coming back, his first game back. Just the different ways they found – the different ways in which they found to win so far this young season has been really impressive. And speaking of last night's game, your player of the game, I know it's a little cliche, but I just want to focus in on that game a little bit more. So do you have a certain player of the game you'd want to shout out for last night?
It's definitely, I mean, obviously Darius Garland playing through the fact that his eye still isn't 100%, like definitely deserves kudos and its flowers. But I think it's Donovan Mitchell without a doubt in my mind. Like Mitchell just played awesome. I think you really noticed it in the fourth quarter and overtime. Like his motor just does not turn off. And I asked JB Bickerstaff about this post game, and Bickerstaff said, he's wired to win games like this, and you can tell like he doesn't want to lose. Like he's going out there and trying to kill the opposition wherever he can. And like you notice in the fourth quarter, because like a lot of Boston's defenders were looking a little bit more gassed, or like Jason Tatum on offense kind of heaved up a 3-point shot that just he shouldn't have taken, when the Celtics probably should have gotten a much cleaner look at the end of the day. But it's not just that, it's the two-way impact. Like we can talk about Donovan Mitchell's offensive accolades. I think he's been elite. I don't think he's been the early season MVP for Cleveland so far. And you just watch him play and operate the way he does. It's awesome, but it's just more so like I keep pinpointing and noticing like he played really, really, really great defense on Jason Tatum and the end of the overtime period that resulted in, I believe, either Tatum or Brown just heaving up that a 3-pointer that just didn't go in, and it kind of swung the difference back into Cleveland's favor. So yeah, just Donovan Mitchell's been dynamic for the Cavs. He's exactly what I think they hoped for and then some, because Bickerstaff was asked about this, like, is this what you expected when you got him? He's just like, no, I'll be frank. Like he keeps surpassing the expectation every game, but he was great, man. But who stood out for you more than anybody, and at least against Boston?
Yeah, I think I'll go with the cheapy answer of Darius Garland. I wanted to be contrarian and somehow force feed it to Dean Wade, because I was so impressed with the effort he gave last night on certain defenders. Or, I'm sorry, defending certain players like Tatum and Brown. But yeah, I thought Darius Garland, I think I took for granted a little bit, while Donovan Mitchell is playing the best regular season basketball he's probably ever played, the cohesiveness that Darius has with the bigs and Mobley and Allen, it's just so damn fun to watch. So more so than anything else, I think Donovan Mitchell, to your point, closed that game. He went absolutely off in the fourth quarter to force it into overtime. I really missed just the cohesiveness and the all the reps that Garland has with his bigs. It was just fun to watch. And one other point I thought I wanted to make for last night's game, I thought Jared Allen played well. I think he went 14 and 14, but man, it was a physically tough game for him. I thought he got hit a lot. He's not the biggest complainer in the league, and I think I saw his arms flail up 3 or 4 different times. He had that really bad offensive foul call late in the fourth quarter where he kind of ran over Smart after he didn't get contact. So that was one thing I was curious about, with Boston not having Robert Williams. Thought, okay, this is probably a pretty big Jared Allen game, and I think Boston did a pretty good job of just trying to be physical with him, trying to force him off certain spots. That was one takeaway for me, was without Robert Williams, I expected kind of a huge Jared Allen game. He played well, but I thought they were pretty physical with him.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Like, I noted this on Thursday's Locked On Cavs, rather, that Boston did a good job in making Jared Allen look uncomfortable at times. I think they played them very physically. The last 2-minute report came out that noted that Grant Williams did foul Allen a couple times, just trying to prevent him from getting position and either beneath the basket or in the post. But, missed calls, you can't really complain about it too much, especially when you're on the winning side of things. But Allen did look uncomfortable, and I think it's just because Boston just, like, Al Horford can play the center spot, but he more so plays the 4 for Boston at times, and I think that kind of just makes him uncomfortable a little bit, just because you're throwing smaller guys against Allen, and then the Celtics are a little bit able to play with a bit more pace and space and just really operate and facilitate really well on either end of the floor. And it's interesting to think about, because the Cavs do have to play Boston again. They could play them in the playoffs as well. And if they do have Robert Williams out there, like, stylistically, that is a bit of a tonal shift, and it does change some of the matchups and just how things operate and function. Because I agree. I thought for sure like Allen would have been like a high impact player in both of these games against Boston, because the Celtics just aren't a good team in terms of just boxing out and offensive rebound opportunities. And maybe the Cavs get a lot of second chance opportunities and wreak havoc in the paint. And they did, especially in the third quarter. You saw Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley being the biggest benefactors of that, of course, but it's just more so you notice like Allen like was a factor, but he wasn't like a major factor. And I think that's more testament to JB Bickerstaff pressing the right buttons and knowing like, hey, probably can't play Allen down the stretch. We'll just stick with Evan Mobley because he can give you some defense, playmaking, some spacing if you want him to. And there's some interesting stuff, but also like Allen can be a functional player because he is hitting free throws at a reliable clip this season. So like you can't like have to like pull him off the floor in clutch situations like you would with like Shaq or Dwight Howard. Like obviously two different monsters in their own right compared to Jared Allen, just because those are like Hall of Fame talents at the end of the day. But like having a guy who isn't a liability but also can provide you defense and rebounding is paramount. And it is interesting because I did think he was going to have a bigger game against Boston, but alas, it's not the end of the world because the Cavs won.
Yeah, all is well with the Cavaliers win. And one other guy who played very well last night, obviously Darius Garland. Um, I think this is, I don't like when people make the statement of, oh, people think this because like one person sees something on Twitter and then they go, oh, I can't believe Cavs fans think this. But I did see some just nonsense about, how Darius Garland was going to potentially negatively impact, the lineup because Donovan Mitchell was playing so well. And I was very happy, just for the idiots like myself on Twitter to see Darius come out and look absolutely incredible. JB played him, I think, 42 minutes. That's one thing I love about JB. He is not shy about throwing the guys out as much as needed to win. But Evan, I was really curious to see what Darius was going to look like first night back. Obviously, his eye is still healing. It's not nowhere near, I wouldn't say 100% yet. I just wanted to get your thoughts on how Darius looked with the eye and kind of how you think he impacted more of just the starting lineup, kind of the macro, like how they played stylistically.
I think stylistically, it's interesting because if you have a very limited sample size based on how Darius looked against Toronto, and he definitely looked amped up and looked like he wasn't fully comfortable just because Toronto was playing the Cavs just very physically the entire night. And I think obviously him going down early puts that in perspective too, but he looked a lot more comfortable. I think you should give a lot of flowers to Donovan Mitchell because Garland and Mitchell both shared post game that Mitchell was in Garland's ear a lot, saying like, every time you get the ball, I want you to shoot it. And the Cavs were kind of force feeding Darius in the first quarter to get him more comfortable and shake off about maybe 2 weeks worth almost of rust at the end of the day, because that's it's going to be a difference maker. And I think that kind of just created a snowball effect for the Cavs a little bit. And in terms of the macro stuff, it's hard to fully take stock of like, okay, this is what is and isn't working between him and Mitchell, or just the core four, if you want to call it for that, with the Cavs, because it's just one game where they played a full complete game together. But there's promising returns. I'm sure there's stuff the Cavs liked. I'm sure there's stuff they didn't like either. But at the end of the day, it looked great. And then the eye, it was pretty swollen in post game still, like not as bad, obviously, as it probably was when it first happened and probably the day after. But like you could see that there's still a ruptured blood vessel inside his eye. He joked quite a bit that he couldn't see much, but when he saw the first shot go in, he knew it was going to be a good game. Or he's like, what did you see tonight? He's like, I saw that we won. And then like joked that he could only really see out of one eye at times. And it's good to see him back out there because he said a lot, like it was tough from a mental aspect, just watching his teammates play from the bench, because he wanted to be out there just to begin with because he loves the game of basketball. But I think there's a sense of FOMO too when the Cavs are just winning like they were, and just like winning in such like interesting and unique fashions that you're like, yeah, I want to get on that. It looks fun. And that's completely understandable from a human aspect, but we'll see how it goes. I wonder how they manage his minutes, because I know Bickerstaff said like he was on a minutes restriction heading into the game against Boston, and then clearly that got blown out the window as soon as it went to overtime. I believe he had almost 45 minutes against Boston. So if you're trying to restrict his minutes, he didn't do a very good job of it, but I understand why too, though. He was hot and you want to ride with a hot hand, and I think Bickerstaff being aware of that is a great thing for him as a coach. But we'll see where it goes. Interested to see how this upcoming road trip goes when it starts in Detroit, and then they go to both Los Angeles teams on Sunday and Monday night. But so far, there's promising returns. My listeners and readers sometimes get annoyed with me, but like I'd like to have like a very large and cohesive sample size before I can firmly say like, yeah, this is what's working, this is what's not working. Because for as good as Mitchell and Garland looked last night against Boston, like it's fair to say that there could realistically be in the next upcoming games, like they could lay an egg, both of them, or one of them looked kind of bad or they look uncomfortable next to one another. But it was a good start, and I think more so the fact that it was such a high caliber opponent definitely makes you feel good about the long-term prospects of those two playing together.
Yeah, I was thinking of a bad sports cliche of they almost played a little bit of like a closer role where Donovan Mitchell was like the pitcher that came in the ninth inning and played some closer in the fourth quarter. And they utilized Darius Garland was super aggressive early on, and he kind of got into the flow of things, got his shot going, got some other guys going with his 11 assists. And I like the notion of that, of, getting the other guys going early with Darius Garland distributing, and then having Donovan Mitchell be kind of your ultimate scorer and closer in the game. And it was interesting because Donovan Mitchell still got up 27 shots. So just like you said, it's one game. We need to continue to see how those two work together, how they play with one another, how they move off ball, whichever one that is. Interesting to get a first look at it against a quality opponent was really fun.
Yeah, no, it really was. And I think that's another interesting thing. If you look at just the scope of these two wins against Boston, they're about 5-ish days apart from each other, but they won in very different ways, as I kind of mentioned when you just compare the Knicks game and the Celtics game and just how they won. Like in the first game, it was Donovan Mitchell and more so Karis LeVert, each dropping 41 points apiece, and LeVert just being hotter than fish grease, and then LeVert being a factor, but not nearly as big a factor the second time around. And I think the Cavs, again, just being more adaptive and reactive to how defenses are playing them, and having different guys step up on a nightly basis. And ideally, your stars are the ones that step up on a nightly basis. And that's certainly been the case with Donovan Mitchell and then with Darius Garland last night. But I think this Cavs team is uniquely built where, and GB Bickerstaff alluded to this a little bit, that they're going to have to try and find that balance. But Bickerstaff wants to maybe play like a little bit of basketball socialism, as Steve Kerr would say, where you have your core guys where you expect them to have strong nights on a nightly basis. But if like one of those guys has an off night, you can have a guy who's waiting in the wings to step up on their behalf, or it just becomes a completely different ball game. Like against the Knicks, it was Dean Wade and Kevin Love alongside Donovan Mitchell that just really buried New York that night. And you then saw Dean Wade be a factor against Boston, but Kevin Love not so much. And so it's an interesting dynamic the Cavs have. And again, it's just they're very multifaceted in how they approach things with a touch of modernity in their offense, because now they're just bombs away from three at times.
And speaking of bombs away from three, we are fully on the Jetty Osman roller coaster, right? So we all know how hot of a start Osman had to the season. In the last 3 games, Osman's gone 1 for 6 against Boston, 1 for 7 against the Knicks, and last night just 0 for 3, only 13 minutes. So I don't think it's much of a shocker to the Cavs fans that have seen Osman and the experience you get from him over the last few years, but he's going to be hot, and he's going to not be hot. And I think good thing is that we spoke about this last week too. JB has the options, and he's going to pull the trigger when guys are hot. He's going to play the hot hand. That's one of I think the best things about this team, and the 8-9 guys that they really want to play at this point in the season is 4 of those guys are pretty interchangeable to JB, I think, at this point, and he's going to roll with whoever is hot. So just a good demonstration of how JB is going to run things. And with Osman cooling off a little bit, I don't know about you, Evan, but I've just been so impressed with what Dean Wade has done, this season. Not only the hot shooting, which of course is not going to stay exactly where it's at right now. It's going to come down to earth, but the defense, man, what some of the defense he was playing against Tatum. I know he had a bad possession when Tatum went in for the dunk and tied it up, but before then, man, he doesn't look like he's stranded out there. I mean, it says a lot to me that this coaching staff puts him on the Celtics' best player in closing time, and he's just in the right position a lot. I just love what I see from Dean Wade at the 3 at times.
No, I love it too. It's fascinating to see because one, Dean Wade is a feather in the cap of the Cavs organization of utilizing him in the charge to develop him, but he doesn't seem too overwhelmed by the moment, which is nice. And I think if you're asking him to be your 5th, 6th, 7th option on offense, depending on how you want to utilize him, he's giving you exactly what you need, which is 3-point shooting, sometimes some interior creation or just some drive to the basket. Rebounding, he isn't laterally the quickest, but he still plays really well defensively and like hustles and just plays hard in general, which is enjoyable. And it's an interesting dialogue people are having, like, oh, well, should Dean Wade stay in the starting lineup or should Karis LeVert stay in there? And I think it's a good problem to have if you're Cleveland on figuring out like who your 5th starter is in this starting lineup. But Dean Wade definitely has carved out a spot in this rotation. I certainly think the contract helps his case and just in giving him minutes to begin with, but like he's more than earned those spots as well at times. And he's been great. Like you said, like he's been really well. And like against Boston, especially, there was a stint in the second quarter where he drew two pretty quick fouls on the Celtics and was just kind of making an impact by being a deterrent. And sure, he wasn't having like a huge night offensively like he had the other night when he had a career high against the Knicks, but it's been going really well for him so far. And he was asked about it the other day, I believe either practice or shoot around, like, did you expect to be this good of a 3-point shooting team? And he's like, no, not really. He's like, yeah, we went Donovan, like it's going to change things a little bit, but he's like, it's been fun. And I know he and Karis LeVert both kind of joked about it, like when they played Philly in the preseason, that they haven't had this open of looks in a long time, just considering camp and just how last season went for them. So I think Dean Wade just kind of being like a consistent glue guy for the Cavs is a really helpful thing. And more so when you look at it, like, let's say Kevin Love eventually ages out of the rotation or just ages out of Cleveland, he goes elsewhere next offseason. And if you're the Cavs, hopefully you try to keep him around because he's positive in the locker room and just, having him retire as a Cavalier would be nice. But at the end of the day as well, Love is going to slow down. Obviously, he's getting older. Like the athleticism wasn't really there to begin with, but he somehow connected on the dunk, even though Darius Garland said it was more of a stuff than a jam. But and Dean Wade is kind of primed to like soak up a lot of those Kevin Love minutes as like your primary reserve four in those rotations, and then maybe you look at other things and whether it's the free agency or like you're developing Mamadi Diakite and Isaiah Mobley with the Charge right now, and then there's guys like Chandler Vaudrin or even Sam Merrill who could be interesting too. Where like at least when I talked to Charge GM Brendan Yu about it, he's like those four players I mentioned are NBA caliber guys. They just need time to grow, develop, and season so that they can crack the rotation. And if you're the Cavs, who are pretty top heavy in terms of their salary and their big four, especially when Evan Mobley signs that mammoth extension that's going to be on the horizon soon. You need cheap rotation depth like that. And Dean Wade is a good example of this and hopefully is a positive sign of how things go. I know I'm getting really meta with this right now, but it's just Dean Wade is just such a good guy to talk to. Like he seems like a good guy on the court. He seems like a good guy off the court. Like nothing but good things to say about him. And just his play style really fits and meshes well with what the Cavs kind of need from that fifth, sixth man. Because if you're always playing Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland or one of Jared Allen or Evan Mobley, just surround it with shooting. And it's just so much, the offense will just kind of be so much easier for your star players at the end of the day.
One lineup that we saw last night when Boston went small was Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Karis LeVert, Dean Wade, and Evan Mobley at the 5. And it was just another example of what you mentioned earlier, just the different tactical options this coaching staff has in their arsenal. But thinking about having 4 capable shooters, around Evan Mobley is just a really interesting kind of scary thought. So yeah, I love the flexibility that Dean Wade brings. And speaking of Dean Wade, those are the kind of guys that you want to have in daily fantasy. So we over at WFNY Waiting for Next Year have got a great deal with Underdog Fantasy for first-time depositors. Enter in the code WFNY at checkout, and Underdog will match your deposit up to $100. Underdog is a great platform if you're tired of the DFS salary system. Tons of games, types of drafts every single night for any sport you can think of. Don't forget to use WFNY at checkout to get your first-time deposit matched up to $100. And if you play those kinds of games, you know exactly. You don't always want to go for the high salary guy. You need the guy who's going to explode for 30 points like a Karis LeVert, like a Dean Wade. So give it a check out over at Underdog Fantasy WFNY. So Evan, I wanted to hit on. So we've got our Thursday trivia this week. So you're one for one so far. But before we get to our Thursday trivia, I think it's a decent point. It's too early to make any grand statements, but I think it's time for, at least for myself, to go back and kind of rethink what we've seen so far over the basketball landscape in the Eastern Conference. And as I went into this season and started to think about expectations for this Cavaliers team, my number one goal was really avoid the play-in tournament. It was top 6 seed, avoid the play-in, and have this young core get a 4-game, at least minimum 4-game series under their belts. There's been a lot that's happened over the NBA season. James Harden, it was just announced he's going to be out for a month. The Brooklyn Nets are all over the news for a lot of bad reasons. A couple teams in the East have impressed. A couple of teams in the East have not. So I don't want to go through every single team, but I was hoping, Evan, that you and I could go through and maybe we make 2 tiers tonight. The first can be, we'll call it the East Elite. And these are who we consider to be the potential finals representatives, kind of in that tier. And then just 1 tier below that, kind of who you see as the challengers to those East Elite teams. So the top tier would be, who do you think is a great candidate to come out of the East and represent in the finals? And then just the tier below that, call that the challengers to that elite team. I know I'm kind of throwing this on the spot at you, so maybe I can start, Evan, with the East Elite, kind of who's in my East Elite top bracket, and then I'll kick it over to you.
Go for it.
Yeah, so no surprise that Milwaukee Bucks undefeated. What they've been able to do without Chris Middleton has been, frankly, just pretty unbelievable. I've gotten a chance to watch a couple of their games. Robin Lopez is doing stuff that he's never, frankly, done in his career. He's always been a great shot blocker, but this year it's even another level. I don't know how he's doing it. The 3-point shooting is there for him, and Giannis is just the best player in the world. So to me, they're probably 1A in that top tier. Next up is Boston. I think if Robert Williams can come back, they're just an extremely formidable team that is athletic as all get out. And I think Brogdon, the pickup of Brogdon is just so big for them. Someone that can distribute. They don't have a true point guard on their team, so I think that was a big pickup. As my dog barks in the background here. And then my last team in that elite top tier is going to be the Cavaliers. I know it's early. What they've done so far this year, how well Donovan Mitchell's played, I have to put him in that category. I just have to. And that's my fandom sticking out.
Maybe your dog's agreeing with you, maybe your dog's disagreeing with you, but I agree. I think the Cavs, at least for now, have certainly made the argument that they belong in the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. I think, again, 2 strong wins against the Celtics in 2 very different ways certainly puts in perspective. Like, sure, the Celtics are missing Robert Williams, and they are not very good defensively to start the season, and they're a bit of a mess just in terms of coaching with this Ime Udoka situation, or the fact that their current coach just likes to sit on his timeouts quite a bit. It's fascinating to kind of see how their new coaching situation is working for them, but I think the Celtics do belong in that conversation at the end of the day, and so does Cleveland, just because they have made those 2 statement wins. Another team I think in this group is obviously Milwaukee. They have Giannis, they have Chris, they have resurging Brook Lopez, they have Drew Holiday. Like the Cavs play Milwaukee twice in November, and I think that's going to be must-see TV just in terms of, hey, if Cleveland pulls off, if they go 1-1 or 2-0 against the Bucks, like, yeah, I think you can really start to say, like, okay, the Cavs are legit this year. Like, JD has found lightning in a bottle for the 2nd year in a row. This Cavs team is just attacking in so many different ways. But I think they are the contenders. And Philly, that I was never super high on them to begin with, just because they always flame out in the playoffs. But with Doc Rivers looking like he could get fired, and then James Harden being out, and Joel Embiid maybe having questions of his longevity, and then like Tyrese Maxey, like, this is my hot take. I think Tyrese Maxey is more so Malcolm Brogdon in Milwaukee situation, where like Brogdon was the benefactor of playing alongside a bunch of star caliber players, and then looked like he had inflated stats because of it. And like, I think Maxey's very, very good. It's just, is he that good if you put him in an individual situation, like by himself? Like, if he isn't playing next to James Harden and Joel Embiid, are you going to get the same impact from him? I don't think so. But for now, like the cream that has risen to the top for the Eastern Conference, I think in no particular order, it's Milwaukee, Boston, and Cleveland. And it's some mix of those. And then the Cavs further bolden their claim in that group if they do handle business with Milwaukee, or even if they lose, like, look strong and like don't look like they look overwhelmed playing arguably the best team in the league right now, because that's the only, like, one of the only undefeated teams left.
Yeah. I think Milwaukee's just it's just so damn impressive what Drew is able to do what Giannis does when he's locked in. I mean, he's always locked in. He's the hardest. He's one of the hardest playing players in the
Mhm.
league. But it's just special to watch them right now. And maybe since you and I both gave 3 teams on that top tier, maybe let's try to match that. Let's try to do 3 teams on that next tier. So we're not going to talk about the Indiana Pacers or the Charlotte Hornets here, but that next tier of who we think, if not for those 3 teams, who do we think is challenging those to possibly represent the East in the finals? I've got 3 teams, Evan, that I'll rattle off that I think are probably in that next tier. And it's early. I initially had Cleveland kind of in this tier before the start of the season, obviously before their hot start. But in that next, what we'll call kind of that challengers tier, I think Toronto is right there. Love their coach, very smart, bunch of hardworking guys. We'll see if their shooting can come around enough for them to win enough games, but just with how physical
Mhm.
they play, I think they've got a shot against most teams. Atlanta, I think they're sitting at 5-3 right now. So far, the Murray trade looks pretty decent for them. He's putting up good statistics. I think they're both over 7 assists. Him and Trae Young both over 7 assists per game. Need to see a lot more of it, but I think their starting 5 is pretty dang good if they want to get really short in the playoffs. They lost some of their key depth that they had last year, which really helped them over Cleveland.
Mhm.
But I think Atlanta's in that tier. And then I can't quit Miami, man. I know they're they're aging, but I just so much respect for Spo that I just can't quite kick them down to that next tier. But they're right on the line for me, man. They don't have much left for until they get demoted for me.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think we agree with 2 of the teams for sure. I think Toronto is definitely in this conversation. Like you said, the Raptors play very well. I know Cavs fans don't like to hear this, but Darius Garland himself said the Gary Trent Jr. play was a basketball play at the end of the day. I think the Raptors, if they improve their shooting, like you said, they could be a very different team at the end of the day. We'll obviously just see how things go. Atlanta, I absolutely agree with. Like, I was high on them getting DeJounte Murray because I'm just like, oh yeah, that's the guy you kind of want putting next to Trae Young because sure the shooting isn't there with Murray, but I think Young is just such a nuclear level 3-point threat that it kind of counterbalances what DeJounte Murray can provide you, and then the defense Murray gives you at the end of the day really counterbalances things well. And just really plays them tough. And it just like those 2 are dynamic. And then you have John Collins, who, for whatever reason, the Hawks are always looking to trade, but I think he's great. I like Nkongwu. I like Clint Capella. I like DeAndre Hunter. They did lose some of their depth, like you said, to kind of be able to afford DeJounte Murray, but like they're playing super duper well. And I think that's just a great place to be. Like, I don't know, like they still have to figure out a few things, but they could maybe eke their way into that 4th spot. But I don't know if they will necessarily leapfrog the Raptors in the process because I think Toronto could really be on the precipice of things just based on how they level up and just how well Pascal Siakam's playing to start the season. And I think this is where I put the Sixers at this point, just because, yeah, James Harden's out for the next month. Yes, Joel Embiid is kind of showing some cracks a little bit just physically. I know I just dumped all over Tyrese Maxey, but they do have Tobias Harris, who's a good player. Like, I like DeAnthony Melton. Like, Furkan Korkmaz is a good player. I think PJ Tucker is a good player for them too. Like, it was a great pickup. Like, I think he's showing his how long on the teeth he is, but like he's a good player. Like, Paul Reed's fun. Like, Daniel House Jr. is a good pickup as well for them. Matisse Thybulle, like, I know is probably going to be a trade chip for the Sixers at the end of the day, but like he's interesting enough. And then I don't know. Like, I think the Sixers, they have to figure out a lot of things internally. I think Doc Rivers needs to kind of wake up and not be so asleep at the wheel. But Joel Embiid is an MVP caliber player at the end of the day, and I think that just gives them an edge.
Yeah.
And when James Harden does come back and when he's fully healthy, like the Sixers do have the potential to be dynamic. It's just can they capitalize on that potential and just regain that firm grasp they were supposed to have in the East when they first traded for James Harden, and actually make this come to fruition so I can stop giving my buddy Jordan Christmas a diehard Sixers fan a really hard time every time the Sixers flame out in the playoffs.
And we saw dominant Joel Embiid last year without Harden when Harden was hurt. And I mean, it may be some of the. I think there's something to be said potentially for a little bit of addition by subtraction of. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
some advanced stats out there with how much Harden's dribbling and how much more limited it's been for Embiid in terms of where he gets the ball in the paint versus doing pick and roll. And maybe it could really unlock Embiid to really start down the path that he was on last year without Harden. So I'm very curious to see. They're 4-5 right now. Very
Yeah.
curious to see what they look like without Harden, and if that could how much they change their style of play, and if that can reinvigorate them a bit, or kind of where it takes them.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes too. And like they did start 0-3 to start the season, and then are 4-2 in their last six, so that they're turning it around. I think losing Harden is going to be big, and they do have a rougher stretch coming up. Like, yeah, New York's not great, but that's a tough game. Then they play Phoenix, Atlanta twice, and then the curiously hot Utah Jazz, and then the Milwaukee Bucks, just to kind of like close out the 6-game slate I've mentioned. Like that, I think they're going to be tested, but they're going to be in an okayish place. And then they play cupcake games like Charlotte and Orlando and Houston and the Lakers, and then the Hornets again. And then the Pistons as well, as they kind of head towards the end of the year this year. So like the Sixers have an opportunity to gain that momentum and just kind of get back into the swing of things. But again, it's just, can they survive losing Harden, and can Joel Embiid kind of reemerge in that MVP form that we saw last season?
Yeah. One other question I have for you before we get off this topic. This is a funky team for me. Where do you have the Bulls this year? They're currently 5-4. We still have no idea once Lonzo Ball is going to come back. DeRozan has put out some just insane statistical performances. LaVine had a big game the other night when they beat Brooklyn. Do you think that they could move up into that second tier for you? Or are you not getting into the hype until potentially Lonzo comes back?
So I am on the record of always being very high on the Chicago Bulls on paper, because they make a lot of sense. Like Lonzo, like you said, we don't know when he will be back necessarily. The knee surgery is troublesome. He's had knee issues since either his rookie year or his second year in the league with the Lakers. But I like what the Bulls have assembled. Like I like Vucevic. Like I know I meme about Andre Drummond a lot, but he's a high quality backup for them. Patrick Williams is still pretty raw, but has a lot of upside on either end of the floor. DeMar DeRozan is an all-star and one of the best players in the East. Zach LaVine's really, really good too, and he's kind of still nursing his way back to the floor after dealing with some knee issues to start the season. Ayo DeSunmo is really good too. I like Alex Caruso. Like the Bulls have an interesting, and Billy Donovan's a great coach as well. Like the Bulls have an interesting collection of talents. Just, can they kind of get it together, like you asked me? And like I don't know, we'll see. They kind of underperform expectations every time. Like the Bulls last season, I believe, flamed out in the first round if I remember correctly. So like at least they made the playoffs,
Yeah.
but they aren't going to make a ton of noise. And again, if Lonzo is healthy, because like I'm very high on Lonzo Ball just because I like bigger point guards that play defense like that. Maybe like they'd be in a very different spot, because Lonzo just made so much sense, especially just next to Zach LaVine at the end of the day. But who knows? Maybe the Bulls are a trade away from going and getting like a certain piece that just pushes them over the edge at the point guard spot. Don't know who it's going to be. Maybe Damian Lillard just gets so fed up with the situation, the Bulls consolidate some pieces and they go get him, and like that's real scary hour stuff. But we shall see what happens. I think the Lonzo news is just a bummer. Oh yeah, Goran Dragic as well, playing supremely great for the Bulls too. Like it's a bummer, because Lonzo's injury just is really kind of setting them back, because he makes so much sense with a lot of the pieces on this roster. And we'll see if he's healthy and he looks right and he's able just to cobble together like a healthy string of games. Like I think the Bulls could make a push and maybe push back into that second tier, where they
Mhm.
kind of flip flop things a little bit, maybe with Philly, or maybe that we expanded from a 3-team field to a 4-team field with Chicago, kind of like in that thick of like maybe a playoff team, but possibly a play-in team.
Yep. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think they're right on the edge for me after I had Miami. Caruso's such a good perimeter defender,
Mm-hmm.
and they have two guys with Levine and DeRozan. If they get hot, they can both give you 40. So
Yeah.
they're almost Cavs-esque without the dynamic defensive bigs, So
Yeah.
they've got some absolute studs that can score the basketball, which makes them pretty dangerous. Okay, well, we're almost at minute 40, so we got to get you out of here, Evan, with some trivia. So
Let's do
got
it.
some trivia for you this week. I went all the way to NBA.com/stats/players/hustle. So we're going to hustle player stats this week for you. Um, it should be a pretty good one. I'm excited. Uh, what we're looking at tonight, Evan, is contested shots. And the way that the NBA has broken contested shots down is they're tracking how many contested 2-point shots per game and how many contested 3-point shots per game. And then you have your aggregate number. And so the trivia question for tonight will be, only one team in the NBA has 2 players that are both in the top 10 in total contested shots per game. Can you name that team and who those 2 players are? I'll go through them.
This might be a bit of a cheat because I was researching this for my story for today. So I know it's Jared Allen and Evan Mobley.
Damn it.
And it's the Cavs. It's that they're really good defensively this year. More so like Mobley in isolation, and then just like Allen just not really letting anybody score at the rim. Like the dichotomy of those two defensively is just fascinating. Like Mobley only allowing 1 isolation bucket this entire season to Pascal Siakam in the season opener is still crazy to me. And the fact that he like keeps going out and challenging guys like Jason Tatum on the perimeter. Like I'm excited to watch him defend LeBron on Sunday, but sorry, man, I don't mean to steal your thunder. I was just like, oh, I know this one. It's Mobley and Allen in the top 10, but they aren't in the top 3. It's Brooke Lopez, who is just having the craziest career renaissance still.
Oh man, I tried to give you a pop quiz and you did your homework. You were like, all right, professor, I'm going to stuff it in your big fat face. So kudos on you. You're officially 2-1 on the year in trivia. Very nicely done.
We take those.
Yeah. For the record, Evan Mobley contesting 12.6 shots per game. Jared Allen right behind him at 12.1. So that shouldn't be a shock, but just something notable that I think it's pretty special when 2 of your big guys are in the top 10 in contested shots per game. That means Absolutely. They care. It's their identity, and man, it's fun.
It is absolutely fun, man. And okay, next time I will not do any studying whatsoever. I'm going to come in completely blind.
Yeah, please stop writing articles and doing your day job. It's disrespectful to the Thursday trivia we have here. So no, but we'll go ahead and wrap up. Nicely done, Evan. Before we close, any last thoughts, nuggets, takeaways you had from last night's game?
Again, it's just really good win for the Cavs. I think seeing Darius Garland back out there definitely gave them a shot in the arm, and I don't think they would have won that game without Garland out there at the end of the day. Like I can heap as much praise on Donovan Mitchell as possible, and maybe he goes for 40 plus again against Boston if he's the only offensive option. But Karis LeVert has come back down to earth, and I don't think the Celtics are gonna defend Cleveland quite like they did last night if it's just the Donovan Mitchell show, and they become certainly a little bit more one-dimensional in that regard. So yeah, this is a fun Cavs team to kind of watch grow up in real time and learn from the bitter taste of how they lost the play-in last season and they lost down the stretch at times last season to kind of not crumple under like high intensity pressure games that are playoff like this one was.
Yep. Yeah. And as Cavs fans, we just got to enjoy it because it's been a hell of a ride, and looking very much forward to the next couple of games and even this weekend series. I mean, it's fun going on those West Coast road trips. We're all going to be getting a little bit of less sleep over the weekend, but good news there. I think it's a Saturday, Sunday game, so we'll sleep when we're dead, right? So
yeah, sleep when we're dead. It's also daylight savings is coming too, so we'll be getting an hour of sleep back. So it's just a small victories, you know.
Yeah, you take them over a long season, especially yourself, right? So you'll take that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We're aiming to do this weekly, so look for us again next week. Follow us here at amnotevan. Please write down Euclid, listen to him daily. Locked On Cavs. Evan, thanks so much for joining, and appreciate everyone listening. Have a good night.